barrier every single day, every weekend, 24/7. It does not matter.
Tell them what breaking the black barrier mean, man. What they
Come on,
look
man.
like,
What is
man?
black, man?
What is black?
Copper Color Productions, man.
Huh?
The Copper Color King, King Cash, Moors and Money, man. Let's get it.
Black King, stand up. But understand what black is. It's the essence, it's the culture. We've been on this earth, you heard? The Bronx was called for Apache. Huh? The Bronx was called for Apache, man. Oh, last breed, bro. We bringing it back, last breed.
Really forever flying in this bitch, man. For the ancestors, baby. For all the ancestors out there, baby.
Alright, man, what's good, y'all? What's good, y'all? Welcome back. Welcome back to the Copper Color Cultures, Copper Color King YouTube channel, man. We back with another dope video today. We are back with another dope video. Oh, man, I got some fire for y'all today. I'm not even going to cap. And why I say it like that is because, well, obviously, as everybody should know by now, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have been trending all over social media. And the number one topic surrounding around Kamala Harris right now, the question is she black or is she not? Now, I'm going to be the one to tell y'all, just because a person is Jamaican or just because a person is Hindu, that does not entirely make them black. I know I preach a lot of copper color love, a lot of copper color soul, you know, uniting all melanated people. But when I talk that talk, it's only to say that, you know, we gonna unite those who want to be on the ship. Anybody else who want to do their own thing, man, we gonna let them drown. Right? Not all skin is kin. Right? Not all skin is kin. And history teaches us that. Thoroughly. History teaches us that. Shall I continue? So like I said, man, Kamala Harris trending. You know, is she black? Is she not? What is this lady's ethnic makeup? What is her background? You know, as we can see, her moms and pops, you know, one being Indian and one being Jamaican, but almost looking like he's Chinese. That's my opinion. That's my take. I'm gonna be honest. I feel like Pops look like he got a little bit of Chinese in him. I have Chinese Jamaican friends, right? I have Chinese Jamaican friends, and depending on that blood makeup, they might not be black. That's all I'm saying. They might not be black. But I say that to say, man, we got to understand not all skin is kin. The lady that we see before us right now, and I promise y'all, my hand to God, cannot be classified as a black woman. And even if she was classified as a black woman, we got to stop using that as a reason to immediately flock to that side. Because I'll tell y'all, history teaches us one thing, that, like I said, black people weren't always black people. You know, a lot of black people did some really atrocious things back in the day. Right? A lot of black people did some really crazy things back in the day. People don't know that, though. You know, I spoke about this a little bit previously, a little bit before on some of my other videos, right? Antonio Johnson, slave owner, right? A slave master, right? One of the black slave masters in South Carolina. A black man. Some people say he's African. I debunk that. This man is a Portuguese fellow. He's a Portuguese fella, and he has Jewish blood, Jew blood, Moorish blood. You know, kicked out of his home around the time of the Inquisition, 1492. But why is he important? Well, he was one of the major players in the slave trade back in the 1800s. If I'm not mistaken, maybe the 1600s. I can't even nail it on the top of my head right now. But we're going to talk a little bit about these black slave owners. We're going to talk a little bit about them. And then we have my favorites. And we could just call her Kamala Harris to Kamala before Kamala was Kamala, because here we have another mixed race woman, you know, half indigenous, right? Some say African. I debunk that. She is half indigenous, right? Mixed with a little bit of that Creole, that Southern Louisiana Creole. That's where she was at. That is Marie Therese Medioya, aka Marie Therese Coin. Go do your own research. A lady who was known to be a slave owner. Did some pretty crazy things herself. And then on the left, we got William Ellison. If I'm not mistaken, if that's not William Ellison, then that's her husband. But yeah, some black folks who did some pretty crazy things back in the day. And even still, till this day, right, y'all? Till this day, this is why I say we cannot continue to pull this, oh, if the person's black, then let's go for it card, because till this day we are having a major issue with black on black crime, black on black violence in America. I live in the Bronx, right? I live in the Bronx. There is no way my neighborhood right now as we speak is classified as one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the Bronx. I'm out here every day. I travel to work, you know, I move around. And the only time we hear about this type of crime is happening with our youth, you know, our young black and brown copper colored children. They the ones out here bugging out, you know. Right, but everybody wanna, oh, if they black, we gotta flock to it. And I'm saying this about all of the people who saying, well, Kamala Harris is standing for black people. She's a black woman. No, cap that. That woman is a manifestation of a slave owner. If Donald Trump is a manifestation of a slave owner, and I'm not gonna argue with people about that, Kamala Harris damn sure is, for sure. While the Democrats been in the office, right, and check out my Reconstruction era videos, right, it's been the most crime in New York City while the demo's been in office. Joe Biden, Kamala, and them, right? The most crime, their propaganda, the stuff that they spread on the news. Let me tell y'all, this right here, this entire environment, that's the South Bronx alone. Most dangerous in New York City. This is populated by nothing but young black and brown, copper colored boys and girls. Right? So this is black on black crime at its finest, right? We want to pull that black card. Black people got to understand, copper colored people, we got to understand first, if we supposed to get anywhere, right, we got to check each other at the door. Like, check each other at the door, right? Just so that we could understand that, you know, this stuff is deeper than a vote. This stuff is deeper than having a political face representing millions of people in America. That's impossible. We are representations of ourselves. So we got to get it together, right? We got to get it together, right? We are stuck in that Willie Lynch syndrome mindset, and we are slaves to our own mental, right? Slaves to our own mental, because how we think and feel is how we perceive ourselves to the world. And if the crime in the Bronx is at its peak right now, right, is this high, is considered most dangerous, then that means these young black and brown brothers and sisters are thinking and feeling in a negative space, right? Slaves to their own mental, right? Again, here we are fighting slavery. Fighting slavery. Truth be told, that's what we're doing right now. We are fighting slavery. But it's not a physical slavery anymore. It's a mental slavery. We're fighting a mental slavery. And we just got to break the shackles. And there's some black people that's behind that. That's behind keeping that mental enslaved, right? There's some black folks behind that. And sorry to say, y'all. Sorry to say. Right? Homegirl, she just might be a part of that. She just might be a part of that. Right? I don't see a kink in her hair. I don't see a kink in that girl's hair. Not one. Not a curl, not a kink, not a coarse, not a nada, not a ting dog. The Aborigines had more coarse hair than this, if we really want to talk about it. Right? The Aborigines and the original Hindus, right? The original peoples of that area had more coarse and kinky hair than this. So y'all gonna tell me this is a black woman? She ain't black. Nah, it's pandering at its finest. That's all. It's pandering at its finest. And we just gotta understand that for what it is. Take it for what it is. Do the research, you know, understand politics, understand Democrats and Republicans and their roles in our society. And we also got to understand at the end of the game, at the end of the day, this is all a game of Monopoly, right? For those people, they just playing Monopoly, and we just the pieces getting knocked over at the end of the day, right? So you got to stand up for something, man, right? Fight against black on black crime, fight against black on black violence, because that's where we create that connection at its source, right? But moving forward, man, like I said, I'm not going to continue to talk about Skamala. That's what my sis be calling her. My good sis. I wish she was on this one with us today, but let's move forward. So like I said, we were going to talk about black owned slave masters in South Carolina in the United States in the 1800s, right? So this is a little book that I picked up on, and we're gonna go through this as we continue throughout these videos that I'm gonna be doing regarding this stuff. And it's just gonna talk about some of the let me see, go back to the title, the free Negro owners of slaves here in America, right? And in the introduction it says, the aim of this report on the free Negro is to facilitate the further study of this neglected group. Most of these people have been forgotten. For persons supposedly well-informed in history are surprised to learn today that about 500,000, almost 1/7 of Negroes of this country, were free prior to the emancipation in 1865. Prior, they were free prior. This means before the Emancipation Proclamation. It is hardly believed that a considerable number of Negroes were owners of slaves themselves, and in some cases controlled large plantations. There were several reasons for selecting the census of 1830. In the first place, the earlier reports do not give as much information as the census of 1830. At that time, moreover, the free Negroes had about reached their highest mark as a distinct class. The reaction which set in the earlier in the century restricted their freedom and in many cases expelled them from the South. This census then evidently reports the names of larger numbers of representative free Negroes than any other census prior to their debasement to a lower status or their migration from the South right? Because a lot of these free people ended up moving where? To the north, right? And then where they were brought down to a lower status, right? After Emancipation Proclamation, after these folks were made free, they were brought down to a lower status, even though these people were already free. Right now, we just got to talk about the why they were free and how did they become free and what they were doing while they were free. Right. This trek reached its highest point between 1830 and 1835. Most of the free Negroes in the North in 1830, therefore, had been there for some years. The census records show that the majority of Negro owners of slaves were such from the point of view of philanthropy. In many instances, the husband purchased the wife or vice versa. The slaves belonging to such families were few compared with the large numbers found among the whites on the well-developed plantations. Slaves of Negroes were in some cases the children of a free father who had purchased his wife. If he did not therefore emancipate the mother, as so many such husbands failed to do, his own children were born his slaves and were thus reported by the enumerators, right? 2 censuses, I've been spoke about this before. One where they're documenting slaves as family members, and then one where family members are really being documented as slaves. And thus forward, right? Now they'll be able to be sold to the highest bidder, right? So that's something that a lot of people don't understand or know about in history, right? Free black folks. A lot of these people being mixed Aborigine, Swarthy European, Moors, whatever the case may be. Free black folks having to purchase their family members so they are not documented as slaves by the census takers. Let's continue. Some of these husbands were not anxious to liberate their wives immediately. They were not anxious. They considered it advisable to put them on probation for a few years, and if they did not find them satisfactory, they will sell their wives as other slaveholders disposed of the Negroes. Right? Same treatment as a regular slave. Slave treatment. Same treatment, sorry. How you do that? How you put your wife on probation, right? And if she wasn't meeting your needs, you sold her? That's the type of stuff these free black people were on, these free colored people were on, right? Like I said, man, that's basically black on black crime. That's crazy. That's madness. Let's continue. For example, a Negro shoemaker in Charleston, South Carolina, purchased his wife for $700, but on finding her hard to please, he sold her a few months thereafter for $750, gaining $50 by the transaction. He sold his wife for a $50 profit. For a $50 profit. I'm not gonna lie. If that's not crazy, then I don't know what else is, right? This is just an example that they gave us. The editor personally knew a man in Cumberland County, Virginia, whose mother was purchased by his father, who had first brought himself. Becoming enamored of a man slave, she gave him her husband's manumission papers that they might escape together to free soil. Upon detecting this plot, the officers of the law received the impression that her husband had turned over the papers to the slave and arrested the freedman for the supposed offense. He had such difficulty in extracting himself from the complications that his attorney fees amounted to $500. To pay them, he disposed of his faithless wife for that amount. Disposed of his wife. That's the type of stuff that was happening with these freedmen or these free colored folks, right? Check this out. Benevolent Negroes often purchased slaves to make their lot easier by granting them their freedom for a nominal sum, or by permitting them to work it out on the liberal terms, basically like indentured servitude. John Berry Meacham, a Negro Baptist minister in St. Louis, thus came into possession of as many as 20 slaves by 1836. A Negro Baptist had 20 slaves, 1836. The exploitation type of Negro slaveholder, moreover, sometimes feeling the sting of conscience, liberated his slaves. Of conscience, liberated his slaves. Thus did Samuel Gibson, a Negro of Mississippi in 1844, when he brought his 6 slaves to Cincinnati, Ohio, and settled them on free territory. Having economic interests in common with the white slaveholders, the Negro owners of slaves often enjoyed the same social standing. Ooh, big drop. Check that out, because what are they really saying with that? Well, essentially, they're telling us that whatever benefits that the white man reaped from having slaves, the Negro also reaped those same benefits. And he was tolerated at the same social standing, right? As a man of wealth. This is why I'll tell a lot of people, like, a lot of this stuff, it wasn't always black and white. You know, it used to be about how much money you had, right? And in terms of money, that meant slaves. So for them to tolerate a Negro brother alone, just for having 6 slaves alone, right, tells us a lot about the social and economic standing among slaveholders back in the day. If you own some, you were some, right? You were somebody. And these Negroes held themselves to that standard. Like, I'm uppity, right? I'm guessing this is like the birth of the bourgeoisie. It was not exceptional for them to attend the same church, to educate their children in the same private school, and to frequent the same places of amusement. Under such circumstances, miscegenation easily followed. While those taking the census of 1830 did not generally record such facts, the few who did, as in the case of Nansemond County, Virginia, reported a situation which today could be considered alarming. In this particular county, there appeared among the slaveholders free Negroes designated as Jacob of Reed and White Wife of Scythe of Matthews and White Wife. Others reported with white wives were not slaveholders. Particularly, all of these Negro slaveholders were in the South, right? They had white wives. These free Negroes and their white wives. That's what they saying. Like, what does that make you think about today? What up, family? What it do, chicken stew? We in here cooking, man. Stay in tune, because I got some fire to show you. I ain't gonna lie. But like, when you see today a lot of these black athletes and black people with money, entertainers and whatnot, with they white wives, right? That's something that been happening, right? These free Negroes had white wives. Something that's been a thing, right? We think that's a thing now. They been on that type of time. They bourgeoisie been on that type of time, right? This is why I say, man, all skin ain't kin. We got to understand that this is where a lot of this stuff comes from. What we are seeing today is where a lot of this stuff comes from. This is the origins lie here in the American antebellum South, from 1750 all the way up until 1890, right? And up until today, if you're gonna be factual. But let's continue. Practically all of these Negro slaveholders were in the South. Slavery, however, at this time had not been exterminated altogether in the North. And even there, as the Negro was following in the footsteps of the white man, as this report will show, this report right here, we're gonna look at it, we're gonna check it out. They following in the footsteps though of the white man. Create your own path, young brothers, copper-colored brothers and sisters. Do not be followers of this worldly stuff that we are living in, man. Follow in the faith of the Most High, and that's it. He will guide you and protect you. The Great Spirit, say your name. Ameen, man. Inshallah. in the South, where almost all of the Negro slaveholders were. Moreover, we find some of them competing with the large planters in the number of slaves they owned. Negro slaveholders in the South competing with large planters. Competing. What does that mean? That these numbers compare. A competition. They up in the number. They up in the score. They teed up. Right? This is the American South. There are, moreover, a few instances of confusing absentee ownership with Negro ownership. Sometimes a free Negro had charge of a plantation but did not own the slave himself, and the enumerator returned him as the owner. Ooh, big drop. What that mean? These yes master ass niggas, right? That's what we got going on then, basically, huh? Excepting those of Louisiana. One may say that most of the Negro owners of slaves lived in urban communities. In those parts of the South where the influence of the kind planter near the coast was not felt, the Negro owner of slaves did not frequently appear. The free Negroes themselves, moreover, encountered such difficulties in the lower South and Southwest that they had to seek more hospital communities in the free states. So they were only doing this in places where they were considered free. By 1840, the trend towards degrading the free Negro to a lower status had become evident in the apparently benevolent slaveholding states. Just before the outbreak of the Civil War, the free Negro was receiving practically no consideration in the South and very little in the North. History here repeats itself, then in showing the varying attitude of the whites towards the blacks in the cycles of national development. Right, but like they said, here in these charts, man, what we got is basically Negro slave owners. And some of these names, what can we see, right? We got Mr. P.T. Harris with 24 slaves, 25 total, ages 55 to 100. Then a David Monarch with 27 slaves. A little bit lower, out in Delaware, we got a couple brothers with a couple slaves here. 3 slaves, 1 for Charles Mills. Now, these are the people who could probably be listing their family members as slaves. They family members, right? But, oops. Here we have just a bunch of Negroes on this document, but with slaves. And this is more than I actually thought. You know, this is more than I actually thought. But it's so surprising too who these free Negroes are and their ancestral blood, what they mixed with and whatnot, whatever the case may be, because it just proves the theory that we have ancestry here in America. A lot of us come from this stuff here, man. I know it's in my ancestry for sure. A couple brothers, right? Betsy Perry, 25 slaves. This is in Georgia. That's in Georgia, right? Let's see if we can find like South Carolina and whatnot. District of Columbia, Louisiana. You got a lot. It's a lot. But most of these people could be listing them as family. Look at the Medioyer family. The Medioyer family, Louis Medioyer, 54 slaves. Augustin Medioyer, 54 slaves. The Medioyer family, right? This is the family that Marie Therese Medioyer, aka Coin, comes from. This lady here. This is the family she comes from. And as we see here in the document, they got mad slaves. Mad slaves. More than 130 slaves here. For this family alone. Out here in Louisiana. Right? Look at all of these black owned slave masters though. Look, Hossein Valerine, 27 slaves. This is in Louisiana. Jean Lisière, 19. Jean B. Mullion, 52. 52. A lot of these folks right here being French mixed, Aboriginal mixed people. Same goes for Marie Therese Coin. That Creole, that Creole. Right? Louisiana, they got slaves. These black folks got slaves, Look, C.C. McCarthy, 32 slaves. They got slaves. That's crazy. See, I didn't even know myself. This is a whole new document that I'm going through right now. I didn't even know myself we had this many slave owners, black slave owners in the Americas. Right? For most people, this should change everything about your understanding towards American history. Because it's not all black and white like they tell us. It's not. We gotta ditch that. We gotta understand that this stuff started with mixed race and colored people. It started with that stuff. Right? It started with that. Right? Like, I wanted to show y'all some more facts that they got on these free colored people in the South. And some of the things that they just have to say about them before we get into the official document for the day, right? So let's check this out. So this is from South Carolina Encyclopedia, and this is what they have free persons of color documented as, right? Free persons of color, also known as free black. Free persons of color occupied an anomalous position in the race-based slave society of antebellum South Carolina. Several factors contributed to their expansion. For personal reasons, especially during the colonial era and early 19th century, slave owners manumitted freed slaves by last will and testament. Slaves who accumulated money through trading or by hiring their time were sometimes allowed to purchase their freedom. Atrocious service to society could warrant freedom. An act of 1702 freed slave militiamen who killed or captured an invading enemy. When the slaves Caesar and Samson invented cures for rattlesnake bite in 1750s, the legislature emancipated them. Check this out. Free blacks. Sometimes. We're going to dodge that sometimes, hijack, because we already know that there was a lot of mixing going on. Descended from Native Americans. And we ain't talking about the Siberians and their Native American cousins, right? We talking about our ancestors, right? The Moors, the Blackamoors in America. They descended from Native Americans, while others migrated to South Carolina from other states and foreign countries. Foreign countries like what? Europe or the Caribbean islands, the Caribbean, right? The pirates of the Caribbean, some of them coming to South Carolina and becoming slave owners themselves, right? Some fighting against it prior, and then coming to South Carolina broke, needing money, no longer pirateers, becoming free black slave owners, free colored slave owners, right? But like they said, they sometimes descended from Native Americans. This is important because when we go to start talking about this stuff in a little more, I'm going to show y'all what was popping in South Carolina. Like, I've been speaking about this stuff. I've been talking about it, but I just felt like I had to revisit it again just to help people understand, like, you know, this black stuff. I love being copper colored, but the fact that people are telling me, yo, still at this point, they would rather vote for Kamala Harris. Why? Because she's black. I've actually heard people say this. And it just be dawning on me like, you don't understand how dangerous black people are to one another, right? You don't understand how dangerous we are to one and another. That's what we gotta fix. Cause we pose a great threat. The biggest threat, if anything, thus far to one another. Right? Look. We gotta understand this, right? Free blacks never exceeded 2% of the state's antebellum black population, which was consistent with its lower South neighbors but starkly contrasted with states in the upper South. This disparity occurred because the egalitarianism of the American Revolution and the natural rights doctrine that stimulated manumissions in the upper South were less influential in the lower South. Also, upper South economic changes facilitated emancipation, while the lower South emerging Cotton Kingdom increased its dependence on slavery. Who were the first people to work with their cotton, right? Those were the Aborigines, right? The skilled laborers. They, if people don't know or understand this, were America's first slaves, right? First slaves, right? They mixing in with the people, having families, those family members being slaves themselves. Move forward 200 years, 150 years, they are now considered black or Negro or free colored. Right? Check this out. As early as 1800, almost 6% and 16% of the black populations of Virginia and Maryland, respectively, were free. So that's a huge percentage considering what the makeup was. Right? Free black in the 1800s just mean you were mulatto, right? Mixed race, that's what they saying. This is what they saying. Or you just had some money. Right? That's a big percentage of people. That's more than just the 1 and 2 that I spoke about throughout my research. Right? And another thing that we got to make note of is that free persons of color were disproportionately female. They were female. So what would this tell us? That most females at the time, a lot of females at the time, were slave owners. Right? We just went through the files. We see how many black folks up there got slaves, right? And what would that tell us too when we thinking about it and we looking at Shawty from that perspective? Right, I'm not even gonna say it. I would love to see if a woman in position of power and position, but she really got to stand up for the people, right? She really got to be on timing, because what? I'm not trying to be no type of slave, right? I won't go with that. It's not gonna work with me, because we gonna have to bang out, right? We gonna have to bang out. We gonna revisit this one though a little later. Oh, there's one more part I wanted to show y'all, right? So look, it says in 1860, mulattoes comprised 5% of the state's slave population, but 72% of the free blacks, right? Mulattoes were 5% of the state's slave population, but they were 72% of the free blacks, a big population. So we going back to what they said, right? Free blacks sometimes being descended from Native Americans. Now, if y'all been watching my videos, we already know, right? We already know whatever they would consider a mulatto to be would be that mixed race person, right? That free black coming from Aboriginal blood that mixed with the Moor that probably came over here to America under an indentured servitude contract, right? Trying to make some money himself, because the only way to make money was through slavery at one point in time. And this is why people say, well, slavery was built off America was built off the backs of black people. I won't say black people. I'll say it was built off the backs of the indigenous people, our ancestors. Black is a term that we could give to something that's like a void, a black hole. No, we got to be specific on who we talking about when we talking about this stuff, because it means a lot, right? It means a lot. It means a lot. They telling us that 72% in South Carolina were free black mulattoes. Right? The term free persons of color referred to the mixed ancestry, I tweaked, of free blacks in the lower South. Before the Civil War, race was not defined in South Carolina law. Before the Civil War, race was not defined in South Carolina law. Race was undefined in South Carolina law. They were not race baiting before the Civil War. This is what this tells us. Read it and understand, man. That's why I tell people, leaving race to be determined by reputation and phenotype. Because of this, some free persons of color passed for white. Why? Because they were light-skinned. Maybe with not all of the copper-colored features. Right? But see, before the Civil War, race was not defined in South Carolina law, which means race was determined by reputation and phenotype. If you were rich and wealthy, then 9 times out of 10, we are not going to call you black. Your blackness is being removed by your wealth, or whoever you are, where you come from. It is now being removed, and you will now be reclassified as white, making Indians white, making our ancestors whitewashing everything. That's a whitewash. That is a whitewash. Right? The state's compelling interest in the slave system led it to regulate private manumissions. A 1722 law required removal of freed slaves unless legislative approval was granted, suggesting that free persons of color were considered unfit for citizenship. An 1800 act required court approval of manumissions in order to prevent elderly or depraved slaves from being foisted on society. The anti-slavery movement, the bitter debate over Missouri's admission as a slave state, and the 1810-1820 expansion of South Carolina's free black population by 50% led to a new act in 1820. To curtail free black population growth, the act vested the right of manumission solely in the General Assembly, prohibited by immigration of free blacks to the state, and restricted their egress and ingress. The final 2 loopholes were closed by an 1841 act to prevent the emancipation of slaves. Only 2 slaves were legally emancipated in the state in 1850, leaving the future expansion of the free black population to depend primarily on natural increase. People don't know this, though. People don't know this. They don't know that stuff, man. This is why you got to go check out my Reconstruction era videos, because we talk about this is the roots of the Reconstruction era. These free people of color creating this society of wealthy copper-colored people who are able to find themselves in positions of political power, right? Allowing them to make certain things happen, leading up overall to the execution of Abraham Lincoln. Right? These free black people, though, they had slaves. This is why I say, no matter how important they make that era seem in history, yes, it was mighty great time to be black, or to be a person of color at that time is amazing. The type of things we can accomplish. But in that same token, we got to understand that this is what that stuff was built off of. It was built also off the backs of black people, copper-colored people. Right? So it's black on black crime at its finest, because they're profiting off of us, off of our work, to build their societies that we still don't live in till this day. Some of them being washed under the lakes or whatever the case may be. But a lot of those people still, like I said, till this day would not accept us, today's black people, into those societies. Right? Those are the people who live in the cul-de-sacs with 4, 5, 6 white neighbors who want you to turn the music down when it's already on volume level 5. They could barely hear it, but they want you to turn the music down. They don't want you mowing the lawn at 8 in the morning. It make too much noise. They fit right along with them black people. I call them barons, right? Because, you know, we put B's in front of everything. I call them barons instead of Karens. But that's what they are. That's what they are. And that's what they wouldn't like us today. That's my take, you know, because they did nothing for us. Nothing. I don't see the repercussions of any of this stuff anywhere. Right? We still struggling. And this is why I say to Kamala's pandering to the black community, kiss my ass. Because I ain't with it. I ain't with it. I know it's not for me. It's not for me. Not one bit. Right? But check this out, right? What they say. By 1860, 299 Charleston free blacks owned real estate valued at $759,000. Half of this amount was owned by 14% of all free black property holders. Half of that, right? Half of this is owned by 14%. Right? Half of it. And the other half is left to the rest of the people. Anthony Weston belonged to this propertied elite, and used his millwright skills to accumulate an estate worth $40,000 by 1860. Jehu Jones accumulated a similar estate through real estate speculation in his famous hotel in downtown Charleston. In 1860, 171 free persons of color owned 766 slaves. Frequently, these were family members who had been purchased but could not be legally emancipated. Other free blacks held slaves for their labor. In 1860, Daria Thomas, a planter in Union District, used many of his 21 slaves on his cotton farm. Likewise, William Ellison Sr. of Sumter District used 63 slaves on his plantation and his cotton gin. Right, William Ellison is someone that I spoke about in a lot of my older videos. And some of the how many slaves he had, what he was doing, how he was killing folks out there on the field, murking them, making them work to death, right? Brutally, viciously whipping and beating his slaves, right? William Ellison, so-called copper-colored man, so-called, right? Mulatto. And then we have another one, Daria Thomas. He had 21 slaves on his cotton farm, right? Waving in the water while staring at your black slave master, right? And I wonder how that made them feel, because in the movies they show us that it's black and white. See, but it wasn't like that. Another part, right, before we move forward, it says, the Brown Fellowship Society was established in 1790 for charitable and social purposes, and membership was limited to a light-complexioned free blacks. Complexional differences often divided the community, and in 1843, equally elite and respectable free dark men established the Humane Brotherhood. Its elite free persons of color established private schools, and their children sometimes continued their educations in the North or abroad. See what they was doing though? Had light-skinned and dark-skinned folks going against each other. Right now, we still do that stuff till this day. Till this day. It's been happening for so long, and we just stuck under that hijack. I love all people. I may not want to rock with you, but I ain't got no hate towards you. It's nothing but love. But how we separated ourselves off of this stuff is crazy, bro, because like I keep saying, that is black on black crime at its finest. At its finest. right? But like I said, man, let's move forward. So, real quick, this little essay about free black slave owners in the South. So what they say? Where's the part? Okay, right. So, one may ask, where did these free black masses come from, right? That's why I proposed the question, like, who are they, where they came from, and what were their motives? So we already learned and found out that they wanted wealth, right? They wanted wealth. And this is from the introduction of another book that I'm going to be bringing to the channel, Black Slave Owners, Free Black Slave Masters in South Carolina. So he says, where did they come from? Well, many of them were former slaves who were manumitted because of their kinship ties to whites. They were not slaves. They were indentured servants. Those were the only people who had kinship ties to whites. Not only that, right? In the 1600s, they were not bringing slaves from Africa over here to the Americas. Right? They were not bringing slaves from Africa over here to the Americas. Right, let's talk about it. Right, let's talk about it real quick. I don't know if you guys have ever even been to this website, right? But this stuff right here shows us so much. I mean, when we go back all the way to the 1514, we just gotta understand where they were purchasing these captives from real quick, right? And what was happening at these areas. And I'm gonna talk about this stuff a lot later on in other videos too, because we got to understand the Inquisition and Europe's involvement in Portugal involvement, whatever the case may be, and a lot of this stuff, right? Where are these people coming from? Who are they? What's their ethnic background? Are they Africans? Can we really say so? Here's this, right? Check this out. So, in 1514, after America was discovered, 1492, quote unquote, right? They were beginning their voyages, Seville, Lisbon, Portugal, Spain, whatever you want to call it. Purchasing their captives, right? These first two say the Congo River, right? Granted, check this out. Seville, Argia, Cape Verde Islands, Cape Verde Islands, Cape Verde Islands, Cape Verde Islands, Sao Tome, Cape Verde Islands, Sao Tome, Cape Verde Islands, Cape Verde Islands, right? And these people were being placed in Cuba, San Juan, Puerto Rico, you know, the Caribbean islands, San Domingo, right? Creating the populations that we see today, these Hispanic communities, right? And it's a term that they give them is Moranos, right? Moors, whatever you want to call it. But these people are Ladino. They are Ladinos, right? That's what they call them. They are Ladinos. And what Ladinos were the Moranos or the Maroons, right? Maroons. We got to understand the role these people plays, right? Because they tell us that they are Africans, right? See, in the New World, as early as 1512, African slaves escaped from Spanish captors and either joined indigenous people or earned out a living on their own. One thing we have to understand about these quote-unquote African peoples is that where here do you see these slaves being purchased in Africa other than the Congo River? Their voyages are beginning in Spain and Portugal, and they are stopping at the Cape Verde Islands. One thing that we got to understand about the Cape Verde Islands is that on the Cape Verde Islands, they were bringing, or a lot of the people that they were enslaving, right? Enslaving right? They were enslaving were the people that were fleeing from the Inquisition. They were fleeing from the Inquisition, and they were being placed on the Cape Verde Islands. Check this out. Right? Historians agree that the Jewish population of Cape Verde has its roots in the upheavals of the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions, with the persecutions of Spanish and Portuguese Jews who were often forced or either submit or apostasy, or had to flee from their homelands, or both. A second influx of Jews arrived in Cape Verde in the 19th and 20th centuries from Morocco and Gibraltar. Right? These Portuguese and Spanish Jews are lanzados, meaning thrown out ones, consisting of exiled crypto Jews and new Christians. Those were the people that were being purchased from the Cape Verde Islands and sold in the Americas as slaves. Like we just seen, it said 1512. They tell us African. African who? We got these lanzados, the thrown out ones. They being shipped over to the Cape Verde Islands, Sao Vicente, Sao Paulo, whatever this shit, Sao Tome. Right? Man, they can't lie to us no more. We debunk all that stuff. The proof is in the pudding. But more so, that's who these people were. These free colored mulattoes, these maroons, Moors, especially in Cuba, right? All them dark-skinned Spanish-speaking Cubans, right? They dark-skinned. You would think they African. No. No. Not true. See, from Cape Verde to Cuba, they landed 75 people. 75 people. We don't see slaves coming from Africa until the 1800s. That is a fact. Look, see, even in 1545, still from the Cape Verde Islands. This is all during the Inquisition, during a period in Europe's history where they're undergoing a big change. Many changes, right? Isabella and Ferdinand over there taking over. Right, they taking over. Charles V taking over. Right, taking over. And then the thing about it too, a lot of these crypto Jews and stuff, they were fleeing to the western coast of Africa as well. And basically the goal of the Inquisition was to capture these people, was to capture all of these lost tribes, right? These Jews, these Israelites, right? That's what we're going to call them, these Israelites, to capture them, right? Whether it was in Africa, Cape Verde Islands, the Portuguese Guinea, right? No matter where it was, the goal was to capture them. But we don't see many ships going to Africa until it's taking me a while, until we start going into the 1800s. And this is all facts. But from this jump, from the Cape Verde Islands, these folks being placed in the Americas, creating a lot of these populations that we see in history today, like the Maroons. Right, the Maroons that they tell us are African slaves, but that's cap. That's cap. Cap that. Everything happening in the 1500s, right, has nothing to do with Africans. Look, see? It gave rise to a wave of Dominican maroons. Who are these Dominicans? People seem to forget. Dominican is a European term. They from Europe. Dominicans are from Europe. The word Dominican is from Europe. So what African? African who? You telling me the Dominican maroons are Africans, but Dominicans were firmly established in the 14th century throughout much of Europe, but they're African. No, cap that. Cap that. It doesn't make sense. See, when you're talking to me, you got to make those things make sense, man, because I do the research, right? We understand what was happening in this at this time in history. We understand, right? They were indentured servants. A lot of them slaves. They all had ties to whites. Why? Because they all coming from the same damn place. They all got the same damn goals. We want to make money, new land, right? This is why the American Revolution, the Mexican Revolution, and the American Revolution and the Haitian Revolution extremely important, because we have to understand, other than the Haitian Revolution, Mexico's revolution and America's revolution was basically so that the bougie people here in America and Mexico can control themselves. They no longer wanted to be ruled by the crown. They did not want it to be ruled by the crown. They wanted to control themselves and basically take the same structure of society and ways of living and implement it here in America. This is why we still see the caste system, slavery, right? Haciendas, right? Vice royalties, right? Presidents, right? Governors, estates, states, royalties, all of these different things that are basically of that origin over there in Europe. Is of that origin, but they brought it over here. They brought it over here because that's what they wanted. Check this out. Right? Many of the black masters in the lower South were large planters who owned scores of slaves and planted large quantities of cotton, rice, and sugarcane. In 1860, for example, Augustus Donato, a free colored planter of St. Landry Parish in Louisiana, owned 70 slaves who worked 500 acres of land and produced 100 bales of cotton. Jesus, boy was making that bread. About 600 miles to the east of Louisiana in the county of Sumner, here we go, William Ellison again used 70 slaves to cultivate 100 bales. In South Carolina, Robert Michael Collins and Margaret Mitchell Harris used their slaves to till the soil of cotton in 1861. Robert Michael Collins and Mitchell Harris used their slaves here to till the cotton. The soil of Santee Plantation and grew 2,400,000 pounds of rice in 1849. The Santee Plantation. Santee, those is tribes, by the way, y'all, it's a tribe. But the majority of the large colored planters lived in Louisiana. In 1860, Madame Cyprian Rickard and her son Pierre Rickard, free mulattoes of Iberville Parish, owned 168 slaves. They produced 515 hogsheads of sugar. I never knew you could measure sugar by a hogshead. That's crazy. Yet not all of the black masters were planters from the South. In fact, the city of New York had 8 black slave owners who owned 17 slaves in 1830. New York had 8 black slave owners. In short, the institution of black slave owning was widespread, stretching as far as north as New York and as far south as Florida, extending westward into Kentucky, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Missouri. Right? Look, a lot of these black slave masters inherited slaves from black relatives as well as white kinsfolk. A few black masters owned slaves in West Africa, dodge that, and transported their slaves to the New World. But the majority of the black slaveholders used their own industry and worked as artisans, entrepreneurs, and even as unskilled laborers to obtain the capital to buy slaves, right? Indentured servants. They were indentured. They had to work their right to passage to America. And I can actually believe that they own slaves in West Africa, because these black masses are still Jews and Moors. They still the Jews and Moors. They're still the same people, still trying to accumulate some wealth. Look, the accusation of slaves by black folks was the result of various factors, right? Many blacks brought relatives who were slaves to white masters. Quite often, when marriages occurred between free blacks and slaves, the free spouse attempted to buy the freedom of the slave spouse and the children. Also, marriages between slaves occasionally saw one spouse emancipated while the other remained in bondage. Consequently, the former slave tried to obtain the liberty of loved ones in servitude type shit, right? But look, they say is mainly ignored by scholars. They ignore this stuff because it's the truth, right? They want to hide the truth, or they want to tell history from their perspective, but you can't do that. When you telling history, you have to tell it from the 100% truth. The truth, because that's what people want to hear. We are tired of the same mumbo jumbo that we've been hearing in our high school classrooms all this time. We sick of it. I stand for majority of the people who make that claim. We are sick of it. And not only that, right? Not only that, we want to see things change. There's a lot of us out here who want to see things change. We want to see people make differences. You know, it's important to understand that. We want to see people make a difference. But yeah, man, moving forward, like I said, I wanted to show y'all. Basically, we went over this in a more recent video. You could go check out my older live streams if you really want a full breakdown of this one. But this just comes from the Indian Slavery in South Carolina series, right? And it's over on the Morals and Money YouTube channel. Should have been on this channel, but at the time I wasn't thinking how I'm thinking now. So, you know, we moving how we moving. We got things busting on both ends. So check it out. You guys will love it. I'm not gonna lie. But we just got to understand who were these slaves in South Carolina, right? They say a lot of the free black population were descendants of people mixed with quote unquote Native Americans, right? So look, boom, Indian slavery in South Carolina, right? So what do they say? Of the 13 original English colonies in North America, South Carolina enslaved the most Indians. The most. Hernando de Soto even said himself he ain't never seen that many black people in one place. In one place, from Telemeco, Florida, up until the Carolinas. Along the entire coast, he saw nothing but copper-colored people. Right? They were the first enslaved peoples of South Carolina. The Santee, the Wateree, the Yamacraw, right? Or the Yamasee, the Creek, the Guale, or the Gullah Geechee. Most people know them, you know, call them African, right? But the Gullah Geechee get their name from the Ogeechee River. That's where the Geechee comes from. And the Gullah comes from the Guale peoples. But enslaved, Seminoles, enslaved. We have wars fought on the grounds of South Carolina, of the Carolinas, the Tuscaroran War, the Yamasee War, wars that basically led to the enslavement of so many indigenous peoples, colored peoples, right? And check this. So if they saying they enslaved the most Indians, South Carolina also emerged as the colony with more black slaves than white settlers. Well, if they enslaved mainly Indians, then what does that say about the black slaves, right? They just give us the facts in the beginning of the book. They give us all the facts that we need, right? Look, From its beginning, South Carolina evolved as a society dominated by slavery. Several elements in the birth of South Carolina accounted for this early dependence on slave labor. The colonization of South Carolina by residents of Barbados, right? Most of these slave masters also coming from Barbados. These indentured servants, or these free colored people, or these pirateers. The express interest in commercial gain by the proprietors found in South Carolina, and the perceived unsuitability of white labor for the hot, humid low country. Indian slavery sprang for these and other reasons peculiar to Indian-white relations in South Carolina. Soon after the arrival of the first permanent settlers in 1670, trade with the Indians became a very profitable venture, right? But that trade later engaged into the slavery, right? Thomas Ashe's, right? Thomas Ashe, a important player in this time. When I bring the history of the old Charawas book to the channel, we're gonna talk about that, right? Right, but look, check this out. They said many Indian slaves from King Philip's War in New England were sent to Barbados, right? Sent to Barbados. So, right, we had copper-colored people coming from the American mainland going to the Caribbean. Further, the South Carolinians were aware of the Spanish example in the West Indies, having enslaved native Arawaks and Caribs. The Spanish also transported many Indians from the continent to their West Indian colonies, right? So we had the slave trade being told in reverse, so to say, right? So to say, we could say that it's a possibility, right? More. We got more. There's a whole lot more in this stuff in this book. I mean, when I was reading it, I was just amazed by some of the stuff that I saw, because it's like, wow, right? The Virginians backed up these harsher viewpoints in the actual practice after the uprising. In 1627, the Captain Sampson arrived in Virginia with a boatload of Carib Indians from the West Indies, right? The assembly discovered that the Indians had run away and hid themselves in the woods, attempting to go to the Indians of this country. Now, what are runaways called? Seminole. Seminole, the runaways. Peoples from the West Indies mixing in with the peoples of the Indians of this country. This is the truth behind the slave trade, quote unquote. In the 1600s, they weren't bringing no Africans, right? This was just straight up indentured servitude in Aboriginal peoples. That's the truth. This is the truth going into it. But like I said, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it. Let's be about it, man. So more, right? Look, check this out. Blacks joining the ranks of white. Black slave owning in the 1800s South Carolina. Now, I'm going to just take a brief pause, man. I just need those who are tuned in. I'm going to take a brief pause. Just stick with me real quick. I just got to go get a bottle of water. Be right back. Real ones. I love y'all. I'm not gonna lie, I love y'all. I love y'all a lot. Alright, let's check this out. So where we at? Blacks joining the ranks of white black slave owning in the 1800s South Carolina. This is a thesis presented to the faculty of the College of Arts and Sciences and partial fulfillment of the dative requirements for the degree of Master of Arts in History, Winthrop University. And real quick, right? For you guys that are tuned in, man, if y'all ain't check it out yet, make sure you go check it out. The Copper Colors coloring book is out now on Amazon. It's literally all you gotta type in. It's the first book that pops up. Purchase. I'm pretty sure you're gonna love it. You're gonna enjoy it. For you, your family, children, adults, doesn't matter. Get in tune, man. This is the type of stuff that's what's gonna bring us together. Like Austin Powers used to say, groovy, baby. And then another thing you could do too, the link will be in the description or in the bio. Subscribe to the Patreon. We're gonna be publishing these articles up there, 100% proofread with all notes, annotations, all of the stuff that you could use to help you read and understand what was going on. So this is in chapters. We're gonna start with the first one, probably try to go into the second one and see what we could come up with and what we could learn, right? So, as an introduction, it says, the story of slavery is more complicated than one might imagine. The slave experience is filled with hardship, from the disease-ridden slave ships to the brutality of the work that filled their daily lives. However, this story is more complex than white slave owners controlling and humiliating black slaves. Some blacks would attempt to emulate the white ruling class and own slaves. This aspect of slavery is little known or talked about due to the poor records of the time. And a focus on race as a crucial factor in the slavery system. They made that the primary focus when it wasn't supposed to. Even among those that have researched this topic, there is contention about the nature that these slave owners and their position within the slavery system. The most significant point of contention revolves around how these slave owners treated their slaves. Beginning this argument was Carter G. Woodson in his book Free Negro Owners of Slaves in the United States in 1830. In this work, Woodson presents a table that gives the names of black slave owners by county in each state that had them. Along with this data, Woodson also claims that these slave owners were benevolent to their slaves and offers purchase family and friends to ensure their freedom. This position is further supported by individuals such as Ira Berlin, who wrote Slaves Without Masters, that the black slave owners distanced themselves from the rest of the free black populace. The black slave owners distanced themselves from the free black populace. But they also say that they were generous to their slaves and wanted to give them freedom from their enslavement. Now that comes from this book that we were going through, this chart, the book with the charts and stuff. Right? I'm happy that I was able to make that reference. We're going back and forth, like a swing, like a merry-go-round, like an argument. On the other side of this argument, some historians argue that the black slave owners were cruel to their slaves in a similar manner to their white counterparts. In this argument, those who support it claim that the black slave owners used their slaves for profits and treated them as property, as we just learned. Historians such as Larry Colger took to this stance in his book Black Slave Owners, arguing that many, if not most, black slave owners behaved in this manner, being more focused on profits and allying with their white counterparts, right? The money-hungry folks, those who were greedy. Right, you had some trying to free their families, and you had some who was trying to get that bag. Moral of the story, right, is you can't trust your own people, right, because they'll turn on you for that bag, right? The most unfortunate thing about this topic is that a few authors have dedicated works to it. The earliest work on black slave owners was Carter G. Woodson's 1924 book Free Negro Owners of Slaves in the United States in 1830. This work provided little more than the names and locations of the black masters. This is something that Woodson has been criticized for, as Woodson's work was seen as flawed due to the poor record keeping of the time. And when they mention poor record keeping, that's the record keeping of the two censuses, one documenting some as family and then one documenting some as slaves. A bad way to keep records. In addition to this insufficient data, Woodson only gave the names of the individuals and their slave counts while failing to differentiate between those who owned slaves for profit and those who owned family. Now that's something that we was having a hard time with deciphering from in the book, because you have some who got 50 something slaves and then you got some who got 5, right? But what's what? The Medioya family, that was a big clan of slave owners. Could that just be an entire family, or were they really on that? The books tell us they was really on that. Much of the scholarly research on the topic would happen in the 1970s and the 1980s. Unfortunately, much of this research was focused on the free black community and not just a focus on black slave owners. Mariana Wickramayike's A World in Shadow, The Free Black in Antebellum South, written in 1973, demonstrates this occurrence. Her research looks at how the free blacks in South Carolina acted, organized, and their role in the state. As part of her research, she describes the differences that the black elite experienced and how they interacted with the white and black classes. In Berlin's book, Slave Without Masters, The Free Negro in the Antebellum South, written just 1 year after Wickramayike's book, offers a more large-scale look at how the black population and class existed in the South. This overall look allowed Berlin to provide comparative evidence showing how the free black community faced different problems depending on their state, right? They faced different problems depending on what state it was. Berlin also discussed how the black elite would help or avoid the lower black class whenever it suited them best, right? They picking and choosing when help, right? When it benefits, right? Goes back to the Kamala Harris, picking and choosing when to pander to the black community. When it benefits. Or are you really for us? Does it benefit? Are you really for us? What we doing? Berlin also discussed how the black elite, the general look into the free black community was not the only topic scholars focused their research on. Some scholars instead concentrated on how individual families came into being and why they decided to own slaves. The book by Michael P. Johnston and James L. Roark, Black Masters, A Free Family of Color in the Old South, looks at the complete history of the Ellison family. This family was the most prominent and black slave owning family in South Carolina, with around 50 slaves at around the start of the Civil War. So they had slaves before the Civil War. Before the Civil War, they was on that. For the research that Johnston and Roark give, they trace the story of the family's founder, William Ellison, and detail his rise to power. The book describes how the family felt about events occurring in South Carolina and their actions to secure their position among the white families around them. Right? So in this book, we probably gotta find this one. It states how the Ellison's goal, William Ellison, if I'm not mistaken, is the brother that was next to Marie Therese, if that's not her husband. His goal was to establish and secure themselves around and among the white families, not with no colored people. Right, so he was uppity black, right? Heavy with that stick up his ass. Right, this look at a single family gives a suitable generalization of how others in their position may have acted or attempted to act. So there were other people moving like that, right? Probably not seasoning his food and stuff, or cooking with herbs and spices or whatnot, just straight up eating it the way it is or whatever, right? One of the most informative works on this topic comes from the work of Larry Koger in his book Black Slave Owners, Free Masters of South Carolina. This book argues that the slave owners in South Carolina were exploitive in nature and wished to join and ally with the white elite of the state. Colger also looks at the numbers and makeup of the black slave-owning population and the reasons for owning slaves. Colger's work is one of the best complete looks at how black slave owners interacted with those around them. Right? He has the best complete look, meaning his documentation of the Ellison family, or what was happening with the free black population, all coincides with real historical facts. Right? So that means most black slave owners at that time were trying to fit in with white people. That's what they saying. While many of the black slave owners in other states may have owned slaves benevolently, in South Carolina, the black slave owners opted to use their slaves in the same way as their white counterparts. Many individuals came from slavery and saw the system as a way to ensure their family's success. In this manner, their relations with the white class compared to other free black individuals showcases how close the two classes were, right? The uppity black and the uppity white, because you had some white folks who was poor too, right? All this was about wealth, the 1%, right? The illuminated ones, the people who had something, right? The black slave owners' methods further show how this closeness in separating themselves from the black masses and their efforts to stop slave rebellions by supporting the white rule of law. They were out there supporting the white rule of law, separating themselves from the black population. They used the system to improve their status, even if it jeopardized the well-being of the people that they owned. Big drop, y'all. Big drop. Selfish, copper-colored people. Selfish, willing to do whatever they gotta do just to make a penny. No morals, no respect for themselves or other people. Right? Check this out. We in chapter 1. We're gonna go through it. We're probably only gonna be able to get through chapter 1, but that's okay, because we'll be back with chapter 2. One of the most important aspects of talking about black slaveholders is looking at slavery as a whole. The aspects of slavery would lead to a wide range of opinions and reactions, even amongst the free blacks of South Carolina. The benefits of wealth would drive many to join the ranks of slaveholders, while others would seek to break free from it entirely, right? The benefits of wealth, right? Money hungry people. Many of these future slave owners would begin their lives in chains following a long-standing slave tradition that began with the colony itself, right? It began with South Carolina's colony. Like we just learned, who were the first slaves, right? With the Act of 1682, trade in Indian slaves became not only legal, but also a source of government revenue. They placed duties on all Indian slaves being imported and exported out of the colonies. Right? They were bringing others in from land and others in from sea. Those were the first slaves. So when they say it began with the colony itself, yep, it began with the enslavement of the peoples who were here first, literally. The tribes I named. The slave system of South Carolina was unique from the start, as it differed in its establishment process from the older colony of Virginia. From its beginning in the Indian slave trade to the bottom of the colony, the slavery system in South Carolina offered tremendous opportunities and horrors for those within the system. Even when detached from the system by gaining freedom or by working independently, the influence of the slavery system was still felt by all in how free blacks were treated by the white class. With many black slave owners being freed, it is essential to look into the history of slavery in South Carolina, how these slaves worked, earned their freedom, and the relations with whites once freed. These aspects are important to understand the basis for how and why this new position in the slavery system was established. Right? Slavery in South Carolina began early as the colonists adopted the plantation system that had been successful in the Virginia colony. Right? What was the system? Indian enslavement, enslaving of the Aboriginal peoples. That was the system. So that's what they did in Virginia. That's why I always say, if you got historical blood in Virginia that takes you back to the 1600s, best believe this stuff is in your ancestry. It's there. It's bright and it's bold. You just got to go find it and check it out. I know I did. Right? A lot of people who got ancestors coming from North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, whatnot, you know, it takes you back this far. Real spill. On top of that, this is where the two biggest ports were. Gaddon's Wharf was where the biggest slave port was in South Carolina. In addition to the success of the Virginia colony, many of the Barbadian settlers, we just saw this, to the region brought their experiences from the West Indies. These Barbadian ideas included the use of slave labor, which they used in Carolina to supply Barbados with food and other materials. Big drop. What we got? Please, I'm about to pull something up for y'all, right? Check this out. Right? Check this out, because what, like we just read, they was doing this in Barbados, right? Look, the founders of South Carolina were motivated differently. Most of them came from Barbados and came to make money. These Moors, these free colored people from Barbados, they are Barbadians. Right? They were bringing, like I said, enslaving Indians and bringing them back to the Caribbean, bringing them back to Barbados. Right? Big drop, see, because now it's making sense. We bringing this stuff together. We bringing it full scale, all the way around, full circle. These slaves, right? And here's where they talk about this hijack. Would be a part of an extension of the existing African slave trade coming from the west coast of Africa to the New World through the West Indies. Cap that. South Carolina was established in the 1600s. There was no African slaves coming in at that time. There were no African slaves coming in at that time. I'm trying to tell y'all. Let's check it out, man. We gonna check it out. Right, they established new lands in the Americas, and all the way even in the 1500s, we still see they still coming from Cape Verde, right? And now even still we seeing them being placed in the Iberian world, North Africa, right? It's different, right? They bringing these folks from Spain and Portugal. These were the slaves, right? The first coming slaves, right? They were no Africans. This is probably when they first were starting to like settle down over there, whatever the case may be, going into that time. But those Africans were going to Brazil, right? Those Africans were going to South America. They were not coming to North America, right? This is why I'm saying cap that. It don't make no sense, because we did the extensive research already, right? We did the extensive research. I just showed y'all, right? They were coming with Carib Indians and then bringing our folks here in America back to the Indies, back to Barbados. So cap that. African slaves were imported to South Carolina from the colony's establishment, but an actual plantation system would not be created until the early 18th century, right? An actual plantation system. This is when they first were starting to bring them folks in. I'm just saying. Right? During the colony's early years, the plantations were small and often used local Native Americans captured in raids or sold by other native tribes as slaves. This is when they had the tribes warring against each other. Right? Fighting against each other. The Spanish, the French, the English, they had them fighting against each other. This is why they had captives and were selling them, because they'll tell them like, yo, if you don't capture these people and get them for us, then we're gonna take your people. Right? So it's like, well, damn if we do, damn if we don't. Well, we don't want nothing to happen to our people, so we're gonna do what we gotta do. Right? Look what they say. These native slaves created conflict between the colonists and the Lord's proprietors, who viewed native enslavement as a moral evil. This was mainly due to the spreading idea of the noble savage that had become popularized in European society, right? Because they mixing in with the people, right? Civilizing them, quote unquote. Right, quote unquote. By contrast, the Lord's proprietors viewed the African trade as justifiable due to the belief that the Africans were uncivilized and incapable of being civilized. You know where I always take this back to, if that's the case, right? If that's the case, why not go and invade Africa first? Right? This statement right here to me just makes it seem like they were scared. Right? They already knew what was cracking in Africa, right? Because at that time, right, you had many different kingdoms and nations. Those people over there enslaving their own people, but really banging out. That's one thing I will never take away from them. Never take away from our brothers across the ocean, brothers and sisters. They were banging out. They fought for their land and they protected their land all the way up until the 1800s, where colonization officially started in Africa. Right? Meanwhile, over here in America, people were already being colonized, and this was because of our lack of connection to the other side of the world. We had people in the Americas from the other side of the world, but our ways here in the Americas were very, very much older than what they had over there in Europe, right? And they want to call this the new world, but is it truly? America is truly the old world, right? Everything over here is older to date. Older. Right? Look, this would spark conflict between the Lord's proprietors and the colonists, as the proprietors pushed for equality of justice for the natives while pushing for greater control of African slaves. Right? The idea for slavery based on African slaves was even included in the creation of the Fundamental Constitution, in which Section 110 states every free man of Carolina should have absolute power and authority over his Negro slaves, over of what opinion or religion soever. They are not using the term African. It's important because of the fact that they're not using the term African shows us that, you know, if we do the research, and if you check out my older videos, I've already proved it. But what is the Negro? Right? The Negro are the copper colored people here in America, mixed race people, you know, that mixed in with the swarthier European, right? Once they mixed in, it made them all the more blacker, darker, right? That's what it was. Trading was so massive that in 1708, trading was so massive that in 1708, close to 1/3 of the colony's 4,300 slaves were natives. So now they starting to tell us the truth, right? And dodge that native term. We're not talking about that, right? We're not talking about that. Native just means a person born in America. So yeah, we all natives technically once you're born here. The proprietors struggled to control the trade of natives into slavery, as even other elites attempted to participate in the enslavement of natives. This would often include appointed officials of the colonies, who would disregard or follow the orders of proprietors whenever it suited their needs. This struggle spiraled out of control, as the proprietors and elite struggled for power over the colony. Many of the removed officials would remain in their posts in defiance of the proprietors. One of the best examples is Maurice Matthews, who was in position of the Surveyor General. He was removed from his post in November 1683 for attacking natives in unjust wars for the sake of enslaving them, these Barbadians enslaving these copper-colored aboriginals, right? These Barbadians, these copper-colored slave masters, right? As well as the transportation of natives outside of the colony. Both of these were against the orders of the proprietors. However, Matthews continued to serve in his post and undertake raids against the natives despite the complaints of the proprietors. Check this out, like I said, the Tuscarora War played a huge role in this, and the Yamasee War as well. The Yamasee War as well, right? And I have an older video on the channel. Chief Sekou is talking about what happened during the Yamasee War and why they were being enslaved because of their skin color. They were being enslaved because they were copper colored, right? They're slaves, these people, these people in South Carolina, they didn't like the idea that, you know, these quote unquote noble savages, you know, had a darker skin pigmentation. This is his claim. But we all know, right, other than that the goal behind these wars, right, the goal behind these wars were basically to overrule, take the people, use them for profit, and enslave and quote unquote civilize the population, right, quote unquote, right? And we're gonna pick up on this one. You know what, as a matter of fact, yeah, we're going to pick up on this one, but let's finish this last part out, right? So it says, the native slave trade weakened following the Tuscarora War of 1711 and 1715. The effects of war led to a decrease in natives that could be enslaved, right? Not a decrease in natives. What it did was it just left the women and children around. All of the men died off, majority. But it left the women and children and the men enslaved, and they separated these people. Some of the men being sold off to the islands or to different tribes or to different communities or different plantations. That's just what was happening, right? While the Tuscarora's migration to the northern colonies led to many to fear the importation of slaves from South Carolina, to the point where several states banned the importation of native slaves. They were banning, right? So you couldn't bring slaves from other tribes or other plantations into South Carolina, right? You couldn't do it no more. The final nail in the coffin for using enslaved natives came at the end of the Yamasee War in 1717. Around this time, you know, the Indian is kind of already losing its heritage, right? It's no more Aboriginal or indigenous person or native or Indian. You are now being transformed into either white, black, or Negro, mulatto, right? That's what we're seeing. Colored. That's what we're seeing at this time. This war caused further settlements and migrations from the region and through South Carolina's frontier into disarray. The destruction of the war and the chaos it caused further weakened the weak hold of the proprietors on the colony, leading to an uprising in 1719 that petitioned King George I to convert the colony into a crown colony. Right, the crown took control because the Americans couldn't handle it. Right, but a lot of this stuff, and when we read the history of the old Charawas, is what led up until the American Revolution, 1779. Right, the crown took control and imposed higher taxes. Right, higher taxes off your slaves, higher taxes off any money you making, any money. Right, look, by 1730. The colony had shifted towards the total use of black slaves, with the cultivation of rice, indigo, and eventually cotton at its center. Right? Who else? What other people were known already nice at, you know, harvesting these things, right? These people, they didn't kill them off. They just ended up becoming black. The Aborigines, they just ended up becoming black. Right? That's all that happened. Mixed race. That's it. Right? They were the only people at the time, brilliant harvesters of rice, indigo, and cotton. Some of them being from the Caribbean. Right? Arawaks and Tainos and Arawaks and Caribs. From this point onward, the slave population would increasingly outnumber the white population in the state. This would spark reactionary measures by South Carolina's government over the fear of the growing population. This new chapter in South Carolina's history would begin the exponential rise in the value of the slavery system to the colony and then the state of South Carolina. Right? So basically, this is where we start to see, you know, a lot of these things starting to pick up. You know, the free colored population starting to make rise. You know, they starting to separate people based off skin color and phenotype. That's what's happening all at this time. Right now, before we conclude this one, but this was a real good informative one. Gotta save this. Right? I want to show y'all somebody real quick. This is the person responsible for the out of Africa theory, right? And again, here we have some communist rhetoric dictating the origin of the copper-colored man, right? 1895, you know, a real big time for racists, right? These racists and communists, right? Just invading everything that black people could take ownership or create, right? Like the NAACP, right? He is an American anthropologist who helped to first establish African and African diaspora studies in American academics. He is the first mother lover that's responsible for saying that, yup, Americans need to study African and African diasporic studies in order to understand that they're African Americans, right? This is what their goal was. This was a part of the plan, right? They wanted people to basically connect themselves to being African. So he was fascinated with Africa. Even though, you know, you got African societies here in America, in the South America, Caribbean, people with African ancestry all over, right? But here we have just more communist anthropologists telling us where we come from, what our ethnic makeup is. And we just can't sit and go for that no more, right? Look, black studies or African studies, black Canadian studies, right? Even we know black Canadians they're not even mainly Africans, right? These are Europeans as well, right? They include African American, Afro Canadian, Afro Caribbean, Afro Latino, Afro European, Afro Asian, African Australian, and African literature. This mother lover is the brother responsible for teaching all black people that they come from Africa. Right? You Afro something if you got an afro. If you got coarse hair, curly hair, melanated skin, you are an African. That's basically what they saying. Oh yeah, I'm with that, man. We could definitely do that. Actually, I appreciate you for tuning into this one, because whatever we could do to come together, I'm with that. Let's lock in. Let's do it as soon as possible. I appreciate it. One love. This is what it's all about. Just coming together and celebrating our ancestral heritage. The fact that they did so much just to lie to us and completely keep us in the dust, or like keep us under the rocks or hidden under a shell is crazy to me, because it's like, why wouldn't you want the people living in the country that you own, quote unquote, to know how great and powerful they are, or to connect this much to their roots? Like, you've stolen so much and hid so much for us that it's impossible for people to believe it sometimes. I was just speaking with an older lady the other day, and she kept trying to tell me what makes her African. I'm like, how are you African? Well, my ancestry DNA told me. I said, stop right there. Did you know that they are using Neanderthal DNA to prove that people are Native American? And she laughed at me. I'm like, I'll prove it to you right now. Right? Siberians and Native Americans, distant cousins. Native Americans themselves say that they weren't the first people here. So if all of these Siberian tribes, starting with the Toltecs, right, and this is something I'm gonna bring up in another video, the Toltecs, one of the first Siberian tribes to come here to the Americas from what they call Aztlan, right, they set themselves, they even stole the belief of Quetzalcoatl from the original inhabitants. And who were those people? The Maya, the Olmec, right? Not the ones you learned about in the history books, the true Olmec, the Sopak peoples, the ones with the thick lips, right? And coarse hair, curly hair. They were here first, right? America, the true old world. It's the Copper Color King, man. I love y'all. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you go cop that Copper Colors coloring book. It is out now on Amazon. Right? And if you subscribe to the Patreon, you know it's $15 a month. I post these articles all over my Patreon, like I said, with annotations, notes, everything. And for $15 a month, you get all that, plus a free coloring book. You can't beat that. You can't beat that. The book is $10 anyway. If you buy the book, might as well subscribe to get all of this other information if you're just trying to learn, you know, because that's the goal. That's the goal, man. We were here first. We the true tribes, right? When they talk about the lost tribes, it's us, the original inhabitants. Right? All skin ain't kin, yeah. All skin ain't kin, man. Negro slave masters in the dirty South, man. Like I said, it's the Copper Color King, man. We out of here. I love y'all. Appreciate it. Hey, yo, Milestone Thoughts. Subscribe, man. We do this every weekend. Whatever you want to do, however we could link up, chop it up, whatever. I'm always down to learn. I'm always down to seek more information. This is not about me thinking I know everything. Hell no. What you got is a learning experience for me, my brother. Catch you in the next one. Let's do it.